Si an Ghaeilge príomhtanga na tíre seo, taiscin na seodaí an Ghaeilge againe. Dúna a bhfuil gcónaí I gceantar san iarthar, si go ná teanga an phobalaí. Den cuid eile is rud a manamí dúsáideach go léithúil, tríd goras éidicas, tríd theirbhísí poblaí agus tríd chraoltóireacht. Is mór is fiú an taithíocht de thugann an rialtas don Ghaeilge. Dá gharthaí leis an bheisteocht sin, déhí an Ghaeilge a athréimnú mar go ná teanga an phobal fud na tíre. Actually, everything I just said there is an easily debunked lie, and the only reason most of you were able to follow it is because you were reading the subtitles. Yet when it comes to Irish, could it be that we're far more comfortable with myths than we are with reality? Since independence, the Irish state has invested massive amounts of money, about 1.2 billion euros per annum according to one estimate, attempting to revive Irish. Yet in the same period, the number of daily speakers has dwindled from 15% to just 1.9% of the population. So where do we go from here? Do we double down on the same failed policies that have gotten us to this point? Or do we consider something radically different? Do we take Irish off life support? My name is Owen Butler. I'm an obsessive Mayo GA supporter. I'm a non-violent 32 county Irish Republican. Is Bralam Gaeilge, Táiminn an é Louch. Well, they're going in. In other words, I'm not someone with a cultural axe to grind here. These two people are my great-great-grandparents, Jim Rua and Mary Nyland. According to the 1911 census, they're both illiterate and they're Irish speakers. The kids photobombing them are two people that I know very well, my grandmother, Lola, and her brother, my great-uncle, Seamie. Now, they grew up in the same house as their grandparents and they received mandatory Irish lessons in school, but they never developed any fluency in the language. So you can see that in the space of my great-great-grandparents' lifetimes, Irish went from being the everyday spoken language of a persecuted peasant class to an academic subject for study in a newly independent Ireland. I grew up only a few miles from here, and honestly I had no idea that this place had been a Gaeltacht almost within living memory. The last time Irish language policy was debated in the Dáil was in March 2015. Socialist TD Ruth Coppinger's contribution that day was broadly typical. She stood up, she began by apologising for the fact that she can't speak Irish, then she called on the government to take, quote, radical steps including a massive investment of funds to save the language. Which brings us to myth number one. According to Dr. Ed Walsh of the University of Limerick, the government currently spends about 1.2 billion euros per annum supporting the language through education, the media, various quangos and government bureaucracy. It provided every adult in this country with 13 years of free education in the subject. If, after all of that, you still can't speak the language, that's not on the government, that's on you. But how does a person spend 13 years studying a language and still find themselves unable to speak it? Now it's possible there may exist some magic formula for teaching Irish that's common knowledge on internet chat forums and on bar stools, but which the professional educators at the Department of Education have yet to stumble upon. It's possible, but I doubt it. I think the real problem is that most kids don't want to learn Irish and their parents see no practical benefit in them doing so. And when we've had presidents, Taoiseach and even the current minister with responsibility for Gaeltacht affairs all unable to string together even a basic sentence in the language, who could really tell those parents that they're wrong? A country without a language is a country without a soul. Famous maxim by Patrick Pearse, who owned this cottage. And if you do a quick run through the large European countries in our immediate vicinity, England, France, Germany, Spain, it does appear to hold water. But what about Switzerland? Does Switzerland not have a soul? Does Egypt not have a soul? Does Cuba not have a soul? In fact, more than half of the world's countries have first languages that are not indigenous to that place. And several of the world's most spoken languages, including Hindi, Punjabi, Urdu, Javanese, Cantonese, don't have countries to their name. So you kind of have to say Pádraig Pearse was slightly taken out of his arse on that one. On Gaeltacht. Woo! Támuid an seo. Funny story. In 2004, inspectors from the Department of the Gaeltacht found that of 170 families with kids in the local school here in Claregalway, none were Irish speaking. Yet in 2012, the town's status as a Gaeltacht area was upheld. There are dozens of these phantom Gaeltachts all over the country, but even in the heart of the Connemara Gaeltacht, is Irish really an everyday spoken language? Every year, hundreds of middle-class teenagers from Dublin and around the country who need Irish to get a place in university flock to Carrow to immerse themselves in the language. What's interesting when you poke around here is that there's very little obvious sign of industry or agriculture. The Irish language is basically this town's livelihood. Yet when you listen to locals converse in the shops and the pubs around here, the language they're most often speaking is English. And why wouldn't it be? Studies have shown that even native Irish speakers have much higher vocabularies in English than they do in Irish. And when you stop to think about it, that's quite a profound point. The primary purpose of any language is to facilitate communication. But even here, in the heart of the Connemara Gaeltacht, speaking in Irish actually inhibits communication. I couldn't leave the Gaeltacht without pointing out this. It's a sign warning motorists that there's children crossing up ahead. Now, I spoke to one local, and I spoke to him in Irish. I asked him why there isn't an English translation of this sign. He became very defensive and even irate, and he said that Irish is the language spoken by local people out here. I pointed out that, local people already know there's a school up ahead. It's the German and the French and the English tourists heading out to Clifton that need to be warned. I understand this is an emotional issue, but things like this seems almost criminally stupid to me. Curp agus Anam, a very fine T.G. Cahir cop drama set in a major city where Irish is the lingua franca. A city that doesn't exist. This kind of make-believe pervades Irish language policy at every level. According to Bunreacht na hÉireann, Irish is the official first language of this country. In reality though, after English, Polish, French and Lithuanian, it probably isn't even the third or the fourth language. So is the constitutional status of Irish just a harmless fiction? Well, it might be, if it didn't have serious real-world consequences. Every year in this country, over 150 public bodies spend tens of millions of euros hiring private companies to translate everything from fishing regulations to flood planning contingency documents into Irish, despite zero public demand. In the Dáil, elected lawmakers draft laws in English. These laws are then translated into Irish. The Irish translation supersedes the English version in law, despite the fact that most of our lawmakers don't speak the language. Last year, a clumsy mistranslation of the text of the marriage equality referendum almost banned heterosexual marriage in Ireland. However, a member of the public spotted the mistake and it was corrected. That same year, a Romanian national who faced jail time over a serious drink driving incident had the charges against him thrown out because the breath alcohol test statement wasn't printed in Irish. In the Dáil, when TD Mick Wallace raised awkward questions about American drone strikes with Enda Kenny, the Taoiseach chose to respond in Irish, knowing Deputy Wallace didn't speak the language. Since the recent Brexit vote raised questions over the status of English as an EU language, our MEPs might be forced in future to conduct business in a language most of them don't understand, since Irish is our official language. It'd actually be funny if it wasn't so serious. Meanwhile, in Brussels and Strasbourg, dozens of highly paid translators work translating complex EU legislation into Irish. But many of the terms used in EU legislation don't exist in Irish and have to be invented by the translators as they go along. So these translators, paid out of the public purse, are inventing new words in a language virtually no one speaks to insert into official documents no one will ever read. And these documents then become law. Even by the standards of the EU, hell, even by the standards of Scientology, that's completely fucking insane. Vast sums of public money are being squandered paying lip service to a lie. And who are these translators? These well-paid jobs appear effectively to be divvied up amongst a very small and interconnected community of Gaeilgeoir families. These are the same people who write furious letters to the editor whenever the wisdom of our Irish language policy is questioned, without mentioning that they themselves are the net beneficiaries of those policies. Now, I don't question the sincerity of these people's love for the Irish language. I'm simply pointing out that they have a massive undeclared financial as well as ideological vested interest in maintaining the status quo. People will tell you that other languages have been revived from near extinction, Welsh and Catalonian, but in reality, those languages weren't revived. Those languages never went away. In fact, there's only one country that's ever successfully resurrected a language, and it's a country you might not expect. The citizens of the new country of Israel, founded in 1948, did not have a language in common, and the ones they already spoke, like Polish and German, were the languages of the concentration camps. Hebrew was restored not by an expensive, prolonged effort, but cheaply and in a short period of time, due to practical necessity. For better or worse, that's just not the case here. In Ireland, we already have one universally spoken language, and it's one that we've made our own. Speak to any activist and they'll usually tell you two things. First, they'll tell you that Irish is beloved by thousands of people at home and abroad, and that the numbers are growing each year. Next, they'll tell you that abolishing compulsory Irish would effectively doom the language to extinction. Now, it seems to me that these two statements cannot both simultaneously be true. I think the truth is that compulsory Irish is a failed policy, but that a network of vested interests have grown up around it, keeping it in place. This network acts as a support system, not for the language, but for itself. It does nothing to really promote the language or to broaden its appeal. Switching off that life support could shock the language back into life. I mean, look at Gaelic games. For 70 years, the GAA had a closed, defensive mentality. Its members were banned not just from playing, but even attending soccer or rugby matches. Back then, the GAA didn't have the confidence to believe that our games could survive in open competition with other sports. And being honest, if you look back on footage from that time, Gaelic games were pretty unsophisticated. Today, the ban is long gone. Footballers and hurlers, like Keith Higgins from my home club here in Ballyhonus, are elite athletes. And the GAA, with minimal state subvention and zero compulsion on anyone to participate, has never been as popular. The GAA was once a minority interest, the way Irish is now. If children were encouraged to embrace the language the way they do the sport, not out of duty or obligation, but out of genuine affection, Irish could thrive. While it's mandatory, that won't happen. It's time to be grown up about this. It's time to be confident and open to change. It's time to recognise that the language has an intrinsic value that will endure long after we stop forcing it down anybody's throat.